Picture a dark Detroit skyline. Just imagine these massive, sprawling, empty factory floors stretching out into the shadows. And sitting right there in the middle of it all is that legendary blue oval badge, just caked in dust, sitting completely idle. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really gritty, honestly cinematic story of survival. Look, Ford is absolutely one of the most iconic names in automotive history, right? This is the company that literally helped put the world on wheels. It's a brand completely intertwined with mass production, American industry, and global mobility. But by the mid-2000s, this absolute titan of industry was suffocating. We're talking plummeting sales, massive losses, really deep quality concerns, and just this incredibly fragmented global structure. They were taking heavy fire from literally all sides: Toyota, GM, Chrysler, plus a wave of emerging global rivals. The situation was incredibly bleak. Ford didn't just need, a shiny new model of car to roll off that dusty production line. No, they needed a radical, tear-it-down-to-the-studs restructuring just to survive.
Okay, let's dive into this. $17 billion. That was Ford's anticipated loss for the year 2006. Just take a second and let the sheer scale of that hemorrhage sink in. Honestly, it's hard to even wrap your head around. This wasn't just a bad quarter. It wasn't a minor little strategic misstep. This was existential doom. The entire business model behind this legendary brand was profoundly broken. Dealership lots were just overflowing with unsold cars, worker morale was completely tanking, and the company was under intense credit pressure. The fact is, they'd become way too complex, their costs were astronomical, and honestly, their product quality was slipping. The giant was staring right into the abyss, and yeah, the brand still mattered to the world, sure, but if they couldn't figure out how to stop bleeding billions of dollars, the history books were not going to save them.
So, to stop a bleed like that, you need a very different kind of doctor. On one side of the equation, you had the incredibly bloated culture of old Ford. They were basically operating like these separate, warring internal kingdoms. They had way too many disconnected brands, way too many regional strategies. It was a mess. But then, in 2006, a new CEO walks into that deeply tense executive boardroom, Alan Mulally. Now here's the kicker. Mulally didn't come from Detroit. He came from Boeing. He was an outsider who brought this incredibly disciplined approach to complex engineering, large-scale operations, and cross-functional leadership. He took one look and immediately saw that Ford didn't just need to hack away at costs. It needed total, radical alignment. His vision was to literally tear down those internal fiefdoms and operate under one single rallying cry. One team, one plan, one Ford.
Now, I want to be super clear here. One Ford was absolutely not just some slick management slogan printed on a cheesy motivational poster. Not at all. It was a profound, deeply necessary cultural restructuring. The goal was to serve customers in all markets with the full family of vehicles: cars, utilities, trucks, but the catch was they had to do it as a single connected global organization. Because before this, global teams were absolutely not working as one system. A regional problem was just someone else's problem. I mean, the European division and the American division might as well have been two totally different companies competing with each other. One Ford meant the company had to become ruthlessly focused, highly disciplined, and completely interconnected to tear down all those toxic internal rivalries.
Now, what's really interesting about this part of the story is how he actually enforced this new culture. Mulally introduced what we can call the discipline of truth. Just imagine the pure tension in those weekly executive meetings. Mulally brings in this system of red, yellow, and green status cards to review their dashboards. Why? Well, because complex organizations almost always fail when the truth gets filtered before it reaches the top, right? A factory delay gets hidden. A quality issue gets, sort of softened by middle management. A weak product plan gets defended out of pure ego. Under the old regime, bringing bad news to the boss was basically a career killer. But Mulally completely flipped that on its head. Executives could no longer hide behind green cards when the data clearly said otherwise. Problems had to be highly, uncomfortably visible, and leaders were explicitly expected to bring their biggest issues right out into the open.
So the crucial point is the grueling transparency this whole process demanded. Mulally would look directly at those red status cards and ask these exact 4 questions. And let me just slow down and walk through them, because these are what fixed the broken mechanics of the entire company. Step 1, what is the plan? Step 2, what is not working? Step 3, who owns the problem? And finally, step 4, what decision must be made now? Just think about the deeply uncomfortable silence in the room when those questions were first asked. There was literally nowhere to hide. This wasn't just a management process, right? It was a total cultural rewiring. It forced these massive leaders to stop pointing fingers at each other and start asking for the specific support they needed to solve the issue right then and there.
Once the truth was finally out in the open, the real surgery began. Ford had to simplify. Look, a company becomes incredibly vulnerable when it tries to be everything to everyone. And Ford had way too many brands, too many disconnected platforms, and way too much internal competition. So the restructuring meant ruthlessly focusing their resources back onto the core Ford brand. Actually, they merged their factory platforms into one global architecture just to reduce all that insane duplication. Instead of each region designing completely separate vehicles from scratch, which is crazy expensive, they started sharing engineering, technology, and components across global markets. This made the inside of the company incredibly lean. And why does that matter to us, the consumer? Well, because customers don't experience a company's internal complexity. We only experience the final product. Ford made its inside operations lean enough to actually protect its outside reputation.
Now let's see how this timeline builds, because this internal discipline set the stage for honestly one of the most brilliant strategic maneuvers in modern corporate history. In 2006, Mulally initiates the pain of restructuring, but in 2007, recognizing the sheer mountain of capital needed to actually execute this turnaround, Ford secures massive private financing. They essentially mortgaged everything they had. I mean, they even put up the iconic blue oval trademark itself as collateral to secure a colossal vault of cash. And then 2008 happens. The global financial crisis hits with full, devastating force. Credit markets completely freeze up overnight. But because of that brilliant 2007 decision, Ford had the breathing space it desperately needed. They secured their independent lifeline right before the storm hit, which allowed them to just keep funding their restructuring straight through the deepest recession in a generation.
And that exact lifeline leads us to a massive turning point, because survival wasn't just financial here. It was incredibly symbolic. Because Ford had secured that private financing beforehand, they were able to completely avoid the emergency government bailouts that became so heavily associated with some of their major U.S. competitors during that recession. And let me tell you, this had an absolutely monumental impact on their reputation. Ford's ability to just keep operating independently dramatically strengthened the public perception of the brand. Yes, the company was obviously still under immense pressure, but to the public eye, they appeared more disciplined, much more prepared, and honestly, far more credible. Their internal operational discipline literally transformed into external reputational armor.
But of course, you can't just survive forever. Eventually, you actually have to thrive. And that brings us to this incredibly powerful insight. A brand is not protected by slogans. It is protected by operational reliability. All that restructuring only mattered if the customers actually felt a real difference when they got behind the wheel. Ford couldn't just advertise its way out of its problems. They needed better execution across the entire value chain. Design, engineering, manufacturing, supplier management, the whole dealer experience. If the cars improve, the brand improves. If the internal systems improve, customer trust improves. They had to earn that trust back through vastly superior engineering and rigorous quality control. Because at the end of the day, the market only believes a recovery story when the product actually proves it out there on the road.
And this brilliantly illustrates how culture itself was the ultimate turnaround tool. Moving away from defensive politics and hidden problems, and shifting toward unfiltered truth and global collaboration. In literally any turnaround, culture cannot be separated from performance. They are deeply linked. If your people don't trust each other, your biggest problems stay hidden in the dark. If leaders punish bad news, your decisions become weak, delayed, and reactive. Ford's survival depended entirely on building an environment where radical alignment was far more important than protecting local interests or playing internal corporate politics. By replacing that fear of punishment with a strict mandate for collaboration, they finally unlocked the actual potential of their massive global workforce.
So, as we bring this hero's journey to its conclusion, let's rapid fire through the 5 key lessons from this incredible turnaround. Number 1, survive. Because even the most historic, iconic brands still need rigorous operational discipline to make it. Number 2, face reality honestly. Any turnaround begins by looking at the hard truth, no matter how much it hurts. 3, simplify. Strip down your business to protect your strategic focus. 4, demand. You absolutely must insist on a culture of transparency and collaboration. And 5, execute. Brand recovery always depends on flawless execution, not just polishing up your image for the cameras. Ford didn't protect its legacy by pretending there was no problem. They protected it by rolling up their sleeves and totally restructuring the entire machine behind the badge.
Which leaves us with this final, honestly provocative question to think about. Is your brand built on history, or is it protected by what you do every day? Ford's whole story proves that heritage alone is not going to save you when the market turns. It was clearer strategy, it was stronger execution, and it was honest leadership conversations that brought them back from the brink of a $17 billion collapse. So think about your own organization, your own team, or even your own projects. Are you just relying on past successes, or do your daily operations actually match this standard of discipline? Because ultimately, a brand may be built by its history, but it is only protected by what you execute today. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. I'll see you next time.